Thanks so much for everyone coming. We really appreciate it. I'm so excited to be working with Haag today from Salesforce. I was just saying I've done a couple events with him now for Plato, and I've learned so much. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. So first for me, I work at a company called Karat. I'm the global head of solutions engineering. I'm an engineer by trade, and I have a really fun job at Karat. It's my job at Karat to help companies develop a structured interview process that aligns to their hiring bars, identifies and assesses core competencies, and gets the most predictive signal out of each interview. And we do that at scale through remote interviews. And so that's me. But Chris, I think most importantly, people are here to hear from you. So how about you give us like a 30-second introduction, a little bit about your background, and then we'll get started.
Sure. I've been working in tech for the last, 20 years now. And I actually have a little bit of an unusual background in that I've done software development, but I've also done kind of DevOps and operations. And I've also done software development for as a kind of internal tools team. I started doing that years ago for a support team at a company called Ironport. And now I'm doing it again here at Salesforce with the team responsible for data science and tooling around capacity and cost management, which at Salesforce scale is a lot of numbers, a lot of data, and a lot of math. I actually have been working with Plato for, I think, 4+ years now. I brought them when I was leading the engineering team at Agari, my previous job. I brought them in and had some of my folks find mentors through Plato. And I really found that not all of them hit, but the ones that hit, they started bringing some great ideas back to the team that I really appreciated. I'm always a big believer in trying not to get too insular with your ideas and try to get ideas from external. And then later I became a mentor through Plato. And there again, I forget who, Poya was the Plato sales guy. And I got to say, it took him forever to convince me to use Plato. I was sort of anti. And then it took him forever for me to agree to be a mentor. And now I've totally flipped. I find that it's really validating to find that everyone I speak to, like, we are all struggling with the same things, period, across the board. And the exercise of trying to do kind of a half an hour, how can I help you, has, I think, really helped me improve my own coaching. So I'm a huge fan of being a mentor as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I know you wanted to speak a bit. I think it's often hard for, at least it was for me, to ask someone to be my mentor. There's just a little bit of pressure and you feel like, I don't want to bother somebody. So I completely get it. Well, so I guess today we're talking about managing high and low performers, and you've done a bunch of workshops on this, and you've written some Medium posts, which we'll share after. So I guess let's just start with, what do you consider a high performer? I understand it's a loaded question, but we just want to give some context.
Yeah, I think any discussion about high and low performers has to start with, how do you know? And depending on your size of company, you may or may not have, potentially, at least at some of the bigger companies, almost overwhelming amounts of help with this problem.
Yeah.
I think you always have to start with some sense of the person's level. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it goes without saying, but especially if you've just gotten into management, and especially if you've just gotten into management at a startup. Yeah. You may not have kind of a leveling guide or a rubric, as Sam Salachi calls it. And so it's worth just taking a minute and reminding yourself that you cannot have an opinion of someone's performance without first having an opinion of their level. Are they fresh out of college, or have they been doing this for decades? Are they making a career transition from one discipline to another? Yeah. All of those things have to kind of factor in. And then you need to make a kind of level specific determination as to their performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And low performers. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's tough. I know.
When I do this as a workshop, one of the questions I ask is, where do you want to spend the most time, high or low performers? Mm-hmm. And I'm 3 for 3 doing this. Everyone's always like, yeah, let's talk about high performers, but I want to spend most of it on low performers. You know, someone years ago gave me a kind of cooking analogy for thinking about levels and performance. And maybe I'll start there because I still kind of use this honestly as I do my own assessments of people.
Right.
So if you think about someone fresh out of college and you think about cooking, hopefully you at least have some experience in a kitchen. Your expectation is that like they understand how to use a knife, they understand what the stove is for and the oven, they know when to use a microwave, and you can give them a relatively detailed recipe and they should be able to knock it out, right? And if you think about them as high or low performing at that first level, right? Low performers are going to like, I don't know, stretch the analogy, but get confused with some aspect of basic chopping, cooking, and preparing food. And then as their level goes up, ultimately for me, it's about kind of a couple things in terms of how to think about leveling. Comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. Like how much do you have to give them the recipe, and say, do exactly this? And how much can you say, here's some problems we're having, go figure it out. Mm-hmm. So, and then especially as they get farther along, how much can you get out of even giving them less and less guidance? And how much can you expect them to come to you and say, well, I think we need a dinner party and it should be, Thai food themed and we should go vegan or whatever. How much can you expect them to sort of help you lead? And then as you think about high and low performance at each of those grades, how well do they do those things and how much potential do they show to grow?
Yeah, and that's a good segue. I mean, in your Medium post about managing high performers in particular, and you speak about leveling a bit and managing low performers, you have a section that's called like all about the level. And you're speaking to setting clear expectations with leveling. And that's something that we're not often taught. And in fact, I think if you asked a bunch of developers today, most of them would raise their hand and say, you know what, I don't even know what success is really for my job. It's not clear for me. So can you speak a little bit about, some methodologies that potentially folks here can use?
Sure. And actually, I'll go even back one step further.
Oh, please. Yeah.
My current boss, who was my former boss at the previous job, when I got to Agari, I think there was maybe 11 engineers or 12 engineers. And we ended up growing to like 60. And really not long after I got there, he gave me the task of creating a leveling guide. And I will admit at the time, I was like, we're too small. Like this is big company stuff. Why are we doing this? He of course is not here, but I will say he was completely right. Even though it was a fairly significant investment of time, especially to kind of as a team discuss and collaborate on a sense of, what are the kind of rows, what are the categories of skill level from just basic software development to system design to kind of process and culture and communication. And then, if those are the rows, and then what are the kind of levels or the columns? I ended up finding that exercise just invaluable throughout, both doing it as a team, kind of agreeing on what are our values, what do we think matters, what are the skill sets that we need, what are the skill set we're looking for, and then having that artifact to have these discussions with all levels, or rather all types of performance. I mean, obviously, with high performers, once you have something like that, and there's a link in the thing you'll get from the end from a first round article of this guy, Sam Salachi, who calls it the rubric. Yeah. It has almost like a dystopian sci-fi sound to it, but whatever. But once you have that, one of the ways you can think about performance is, okay, if we feel like you're, senior software engineer or whatever you call it, titles I think get kind of quickly absurd, but okay, fine. You're senior software engineer. If they're high performing, then they are showing some of the characteristics of that next level, and having that written down. It's also a great way to work with ambitious folks. I want to get a promotion. Okay, great. Have you done X, Y, and Z? Have you brought an idea to us? Have you suggested something? Have you mentored somebody? Have you, right? And similarly with low performers, it's awfully nice. I think within a year or two of moving into management, you'll get an intuitive sense. But it's hard to take your intuition and have a productive conversation or potentially a painful conversation with a low performer. But if you've already kind of documented, especially if you've done it as a team, your expectations, and someone is maybe struggling to meet those, it's a little less personal. Hey, we expect a new college grad to know, how to use a Cuisinart. And every time we tell you to use a Cuisinart, we have to literally show you how to plug it in, and like whatever it is. So I'm a big fan. Actually, I am very fortunate. Salesforce, some group just recently created a really really detailed leveling guide that I use frequently in my job.
I love that. I love that. And actually, there's a question that I want to ask you from the audience that I think is, kind of relevant, which is I work as a remote manager, and I'm working to help grow an engineer that is a junior level and probably doesn't know how to use a Cuisinart, right? And struggles to keep pace. Any advice for helping lead someone like this in a remote setting?
So first off, I'll go to your AMA because we are now all remote managers. And I got to admit, I really like being in the office. I like being with people. I am struggling as a remote manager. Yeah. But to your specific question, one thing that I become very passionate about, really for any new hire, but especially for junior new hires, is they should have both a boss and a mentor. They should ideally not be the same person. And one thing that I tell the mentors, and you have to kind of set this expectation throughout the team and throughout your stakeholders, the mentor's number one job is the success of the mentee. Mm-hmm. Even if that means that their productivity drops. I often think about momentum. I had a mentor years ago who, when I first started managing, I was the classic micromanager. We would get our stuff done on time, but I would do it through just sheer force of will and telling people exactly what to do. And we'd finish a project and the whole team would just drop dead and be like, what next, boss? And over the years, I've come to find thinking about how to be faster next quarter is actually more important than what you deliver this quarter. There's a great quote from a book. I am, by the way, going to get back to the junior Cuisinart question. There's a great quote from a book called The Phoenix Project that says, improving daily work is more important than doing daily work. And I think that investing in your juniors, investing in your new hires, even if it slows you down today, will speed you up more later. There's a book that I have in my list of links that you guys will all get called The Manager's Path. And it has a whole section on how to be a mentor. And one thing we've done is get a PDF version of that. And anyone who wants to mentor has to read it. And really the expectation you want to set with that mentee who is struggling to learn how to use a Cuisinart is that no question is, that mentor exists to help you get off to a good start. No question is too stupid. And I think this is really hard remote. It's easy in person for a good mentor to really almost like limbically explain, please interrupt me. Like, the bar for when to interrupt me should be 0. Just interrupt me all the time. But if you're remote, it is harder. And I think it's on the onus is on the manager and the mentor to really let that junior person know, bug me a bunch. You've got 5 weeks of my attention. Use it as often as you need.
I love that. Thank you. So I am going to start, we're getting a bunch of questions. We have 12 open questions. So I'm just going to start throwing them at you. That sound good, Chris?
Sure.
All right. So 22 people would like to know, how do you know when low performers can be salvaged? And when do you know it's time to move on?
Yeah, one of my favorite interview questions is basically that question. Like, how do you decide when to let somebody go? And I'll tell you, through countless interviews, the vast majority of managers, even senior managers and directors that I interview, basically improvise an answer on the spot. Mm-hmm. And I really, if you take nothing else away from this AMA, do some thinking on this. Don't improvise it. Yeah. I think there's a dimensionality. Well, so actually, let me answer that question specifically, and then I might go to a broader version of that question. Mm-hmm. Knowing when to flip to managing out it is something you're going to have to come up with for yourself. I'll suggest 3 models And I don't necessarily want to say that any one of these models is right or wrong, but I will say, come up with one. Like, don't make it up every time you have a low performer. I think the simplest model to think about this is just that sense of, what are your expectations for the level, and are they at least on a trajectory to meet them in some reasonable time frame. And that there's definitely subjectivity here, but if you're not seeing them head there consistently and on a time path, or you're seeing them meet, exceed, not exceed, if they're on some kind of sawtooth pattern, that can be a one way to kind of think, okay, I got to flip. Mm-hmm. Another model is the classic kind of performance potential 2x2. Usually your y-axis is potential and your x-axis is potential and your y-axis is performance. Obviously, if they're both not performing the level, and you can't make a case that they've got a lot of potential, that can be a way to go, okay, it's time to give up. It's a great moment to get some 360 feedback, get another manager, get some other people to give you some insight. I prefer a little bit different model. A lot of leaders think about, is this a family? Is this a team? Is this I don't know what else it would be. I prefer to think of myself as kind of the coach of a professional sports team. And, from that perspective, I should say, if you think of yourself as like the head of a family, would you ever fire anybody? Like there's nothing my daughters could do that I would fire them. But I do think as leaders, we have to be ready to make that very hard choice. So for me, the kind of sports team model is a little more appropriate. You can try to then balance the needs of the person, the team, and the company, and start to ask yourself, is this person at least supporting the performance of the whole team, or ideally helping the team improve, or are they bringing it down? There's a stat in baseball, which is, I'm probably not going to, there's probably actual baseball fans on the call, but it's something about relative to replacement value, right? Like if you just went and got the average second baseman, how does this person perform? And I mean, that might sound kind of ruthless, but I do kind of think that way. For that level, if we just opened a rec and hired somebody, is this person kind of meets or well below? I think that if your sense is that they are well below replacement value, that may be one way of making that very hard call. I'll broaden my answer because I do think it's worth thinking about this. Yeah, to me, this is a crux of the matter with low performers, and it's worth thinking of it as kind of having kind of boundary conditions. On the one hand, there's basically, you got to punch somebody in the face or like just never show up and do the job to be fired. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, I've worked at that company, and I didn't like it. Yeah. And then there's the famous, and I actually have a link to this. There's the famous Netflix PowerPoint from like a decade ago that good enough is good goodbye.
I remember, oh my gosh.
Right. I don't know that I'm really comfortable with either of those. But, kind of finding your own middle ground and finding your kind of rationale behind it. And then maybe depending on the size of your company, working with your manager and peers and trying to have some consistency within your org is a really worthwhile exercise. And if I'm ever interviewing you, you'll be prepared for my question.
I'm very excited now. I think half the people here want to work for you after this.
No.
I guess, there's another question about low performers, but I wonder if you could briefly touch on what's the manager's responsibilities in these cases?
For low performers.
Yeah, for low performers. I think it's something that you talk about in your Medium post. And I think just, I know you have some feedback on low performers and how to identify them, but do you have like a small subset of, manager responsibilities in those cases that folks should be thinking about?
I mean, at the most fundamental level, you should be like I think the platonic ideal of a leader is you're such a good coach, you never have to fire anybody.
Yeah.
Right. And I do think, despite the fact that kind of my whole message here is most of the people I work with err on the side of waiting too long.
Mm-hmm.
I still think the expectation we should have for ourselves is that we can coach anybody up.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe that's my first statement is do everything you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I really notice, because a lot of times this becomes a coaching challenge. Mm-hmm. And so maybe, one thing I don't talk about in my blogs is that when you're struggling to coach somebody, often the problem is that they're exhibiting one of these kind of 4 kind of blockers to being coached, which are trust, personally identifying with their job, external loci of control or victim mentality, and kind of the old Alcoholics Anonymous. Do they recognize there's a problem? And I'll briefly take each one in turn. Google has socialized this wonderful phrase. What is it called? Psychological safety. Mm. If you've ever received even useful free feedback from someone you don't trust, how hard it is to receive that. So one of the first and most important roles of a leader is to build trust. Mm-hmm. Assuming you have trust with the person, you will meet people whose sense of identity is tied to the actual tasks of their job. And if you try to tell them that the job they're doing is not great, they will interpret that as just a one-to-one, analogy. I am not great. Mm-hmm. And you can't really coach that person until you've helped them tease apart that their sort of worth as a human is not necessarily tied to the fact that their pull requests are freaking 10 pages long and they need to start checking a code more often.
Oh my gosh, it's so true.
I've met that person. I have tried to coach that person.
I've been that person.
Yeah, and you don't even bother with the pull request.
Totally.
work on that one. External loci of control is the psychological term. The colloquial term would be victim mentality. There are just they're kind of the Eeyores of the world that nothing will ever work. It's beyond my control. And often they're, especially as they grow within an org, that can be a harder person to coach because they don't see that they can make a change. All they see is obstacles. And that one can be hard to coach because it also tends to be tied to their personality. And then the last one, if they don't see that, 5,000 line check-ins and asking someone to review that is an anti-pattern, you can't coach them on how to rethink their process so they do smaller check-ins or maybe do pair programming. You have to get them to acknowledge that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And back to the manager's responsibility, your responsibility is to coach this person up. And so maybe, one of the things you need to be constantly thinking about is how to be a better coach.
I love that. And that's a great segue into the next question that about 9 folks want to hear about. So Israel Carberry is asking, with a low performer, we have identified that their main issue is hitting a wall, but not reaching out, continuing to resolve whatever issue alone. We've tried to find a way to trigger that contact, but nothing seems to be working. I don't want to be the one to be constantly bothering or babysitting to keep him from staying stuck. Do you have any good methods to make that happen? I guess the lone wolf thing.
Well, I have a whole section in my blog on motivations, which I think kind of plays here. This is another one of those dimensional challenges. We can get it wrong in terms of never asking for help or not asking for help often enough and staying stuck. And you can get it wrong by not doing your homework first and just constantly asking for someone for help. And, if you manage long enough, you'll meet both of those people. I would come back to, so I'm a big believer that that one things that successful leaders should invest in is being kind of an amateur psychologist. Mm-hmm. It's possible that they're exhibiting one of the 4 anti-patterns. Maybe they don't ask for help because they don't want, because every time they get help, they feel like it's a criticism of them as a person. You also, introverts, super shy people, maybe just don't want to ask for help. Maybe you need to give them a buddy or someone who pair programs with them or checks in with them and really gets them over that hump. I think it's difficult for me to, I'm guessing, but I think if they're consistently exhibiting this behavior and just simply telling them stop, don't stay stuck for a week isn't working, you probably want to flip to some longer conversations, even ask about feelings, and see if you and they can get feelings.
Oh my goodness.
We're engineers. We don't do feelings.
Oh no. Empathy.
And see if you can kind of get into like maybe why. What is the resistance they're feeling towards striking that balance? As a last resort in places like this, I've literally told people, you will ask for help twice a week and you will CC me on the emails. Like just just force them. I mean, sometimes that can help.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. 9 people are asking, it's about motivation. So how do you continue to motivate or challenge high performers who are starting to plateau and get comfortable in their role?
That's an interesting question. In my experience, many high performers kind of are never comfortable. I mean, it's sort of core to their ethos. To me, that's an interesting way of stating that question. I would be curious, what do we mean by comfortable? Because if like, to me, I'm hearing that as they're kind of no longer growing. I love that there's a thing, what's her face? Fosgren, I forget her first name. One of the 3 people who wrote this book, Accelerate, that I love. And one of her one of her many wonderful teachings is that maturity curve as a mental model is an anti-pattern. In other words, like you'll see like big, like Anderson Consulting or whatever will be like, where are you on the security maturity curve? As if, are you level 0, 1, 2, 3, or 5? As if once you've reached 5, you're somehow done.
Right.
And I think what most of us understand intuitively, and what a lot of the kind of organizational science and organizational psychology suggests, is that what high-performing teams are doing is just constantly improving. And so if you're telling me you have a high performer who is comfortable, I kind of question whether they're a high performer, because like what high performer people are thinking is, what can I do to get 1% better?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What can I do to get a little better, a little more efficient?
I mean, I've seen them checked out potentially, but not necessarily plateauing if they're still very invested.
Actually, that is something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Because it may be that they appear to have plateaued to you, and what they're actually doing is looking for their next job.
That's right. Sorry, anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
9 other folks.
Which then, suggests you need to challenge them. You need to ask them. I write this in my blog. I really encourage, when you ask questions like this, there's a great course from this company, Life Labs Learning, on giving feedback or rather asking for feedback. And one of their suggestions, apparently from psychological research, don't say, what could we do to improve your job satisfaction? Or what could we do to challenge you a little more? Or what could we do to say, what would make your job 5% more interesting? And apparently there's some sort of Vulcan mind trick that happens when you give that fake small numeric improvement that really helps people give you some useful answer rather than, I don't know. Works with teenagers too.
I bet. I would have to say, I don't know, candy? More candy in the office. Awesome. Thank you. And I think some of what you've been talking about also kind of leads into this question that 6 folks are interested in, which is, how do you manage and create growth paths for people who have more experience than you?
That's fun.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've been entrusted with the people management of that person is a really great sign.
Exactly. And the fact that you've hired them, hiring people smarter than you is one of the signs of a great leader. I love that. Yeah.
Um, so how do you
manage and create growth paths for people who are more experienced than you?
Sure. Trying to think of a helpful answer there.
The mentor that has,
Yeah, I mean,
like Chris.
well, if their experience truly is, broadly more, greater than yours, but I'm assuming maybe they've chosen to not go into management of people, so they're an IC. I use them as a mentor. Challenge them. How can we help make this entire team perform at a higher level? How could we measure that? And how could we celebrate our success once we've done it? I think, and then I mean, maybe the question is asking about career path. If they truly are an IC who is more experienced than you and heading, heading on a trajectory that's maybe faster than you up the organizational ladder, you probably also need to get other mentors or other leaders involved. Like it may be difficult for you to help them in that sense.
Yeah, no, I like that. Great. Okay, another one. We have 15 open now. It's amazing. So while a lot of focus is on high-low performers, what are some strategies to manage the middle of the pack team members? Is there room for mediocrity? How do we continue to inspire excellence across the team if there's a disparity in quality? I guess quality used here.
Yeah, I mean, this is another kind of define your terms question. One mental model that I have is once you've created a sense of levels, from junior to mid-career to senior, I like to be very clear that at certain junior levels, growth is required. And maybe the closest I come to good enough is goodbye would be someone at a junior level who's never progressing to where they know how to use the fancy blades in the Cuisinart or whatever it is. There is a sense for me that if you're performing at an adequate level as a new college grad and 2 years have gone by and that's still what you're doing, that may be someone to move on. At some higher levels, absolutely meeting your company's very high expectations for that level is acceptable indefinitely. Mm-hmm. And I think, as you say, coaching someone who's reached that level, I think it's very important for you and that person to be clear. Like it's not healthy if you're pushing them to go a level and what they want to do is just come in, crush it and go home and not think about how to grow. Like, that's going to be ugly. And similarly, if you've kind of pegged them as, they're fine, but they really want to grow, that's going to not work out well either. So having that conversation, and I will say, you have to be sensitive to this. Traditionally, managers will say, well, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And that question for someone who is like, I'm comfortable as senior engineer and I don't ever want to be whatever grand poobah engineer. That question can be super stressful because you feel like the wrong answer is I'm just fine. Mm-hmm. So thinking about how to have that conversation in a way that doesn't kind of lead the witness and gets that honest answer is super important.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been guilty of not doing so well and hitting somebody with that question. Hey, what do you want to do next? What initiative do you want to work on? I'm really great and I'm happy with what I'm doing. Yeah. I totally get it. All right. 6 folks now are asking, managing low performers takes a lot of time and investment and can cause undue stress and frustration. How can managers help manage the personal effects, and what are some ways to determine when it is worth it?
Well, I think we covered a little bit of...
We did, yeah. I was going to say we covered some of this.
So first off, assuming you're not a psychopath, which hopefully you're not, absolutely start from the standpoint that this sucks. No creature capable of sensing their environment moves towards pain. But as a manager, if you have a low performer that's trending towards getting rid of them, you have to do the thing that creatures don't want to do and move towards the pain, which is hopefully a somewhat empathic way of saying, no, sorry, it's gonna suck. Yeah. It's gonna suck a lot. Obviously, part of it is don't hang on too long. I quote a section of this book, Radical Candor. She calls it the 4 lies we all tell each other. Be wary of those. Be wary of ways your kind of psychology will trick you into hanging on too long, which is, I got to tell you, just extending your pain. But then, emotional regulation is this thing that for the most of us, we grew up modeling our parents and don't even think of it as a skill. The actual truth is that regulating your own emotions is a skill no different than learning the ukulele or learning to surf. And I've been there. Most of us get into, we get through college in our 20s and it's all is well. And you don't never even really think about this skill of regulating my emotions. And then suddenly you've got a mortgage and a family and a partner and a boss and a freaking pandemic. And suddenly your surfing skills are inadequate to the waves you're riding. And suddenly you're falling off potentially at a really bad moment. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying, become an amateur psychologist. Understand what self-regulation means, what co-regulation means, understanding what skills work. I mean, some of them you already know: exercise, meditation, venting to a friend. And of course, there's plenty of unhealthy, emotionally regulating ways like drinking and whatever else. But be aware that, as you work through this process, if you think of the analogy of surfing as a skill, managing someone out means you're riding bigger waves. And if you don't attend to yourself, you're A, likely to suffer more, and B, it's going to be harder to be empathic and kind of compassionate to the person that you're working with.
Yeah, very much, very much. Awesome. Lakshmi is asking an interesting question. So, oh, poor Lakshmi. How do you lead and mentor people who think they are high performers, but they're not?
Oh, God.
Oh gosh, or even that, for me, that sense of entitlement, right? Or they've been spoiled and told they're amazing, and you're seeing I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and quite often in a situation like that, maybe they're exhibiting that fourth blocker to any kind of coaching, which is they don't even understand. They can't even acknowledge that there are problems with their performance.
Yeah.
I think there are there may be two kind of rigorous ways that you can approach that as a manager. A, have the leveling guide, ideally, and then do your homework, be able to be specific. Again, back to that Life Labs learning course on giving feedback. Specific is always better than general. And find those coachable moments and sort of get them alone and talk about expectation was X. Here's what I saw. Beware of the fundamental attribution error. Don't talk about them as screwing up. Talk about, the situation, the behavior, and how the outcome was suboptimal, and what outcome you would have expected. And again, this is the kind of place where, if you can, go have a practice run with some sympathetic peer, and then bring your coaching to the person. Really tie it to the specifics of the situation, their behavior, and the outcome that arrived. And at some point, honestly, if they continue to have a huge disconnect between their self-perception and the team's perception, that's not good. That's going to lead them on a path that maybe, it's difficult to keep them on the team.
Yeah, for sure. And people are jumping in. Gayatri's saying tears of pain for this. And Daniel Short is saying, he's dealing with that right now. And they've gotten you're just picking on my PRs and you don't do that with insert other coworker, right? It's a tough, you've been there. I've been there. It's tough. It's tough, Chris. This one's
I got to tell you, like, it's really hard to avoid why can't you just be more like your brother? Or why can't you just be more like your sister? Like, why can't I keep talking to you?
This person, exactly. They're like, I'm not this person. What do you mean? Oh, it's tough.
Yeah, I don't know that my answer changes. Like you come back to specifics, be clear, talk about the outcomes, and if they can't hear it, especially if you can be specific. I don't know, the phrase I tend to use, I feel like there's this path between I'm coaching you up to, oh God. Mm-hmm. And that, oh God moment for me is, I don't think, fortunately, no one on this call, near as I can tell the people, has ever heard me say this. But the phrase is, if this behavior continues, your continued employment with insert company will be at risk. And I will tell you, I've said that to people whose performance has exceeded mine. So, but I'm answering kind of a different question, but I think that it is really hard and incumbent on you to have the self-confidence to let them know when they're exhibiting behaviors that are career limiting. As much as, like, in some ways, I think that's a harder thing to say than 6 months down the road when you've completed the PIP and you're getting HR involved and you're actually firing them. It's that first moment when you go, this is no longer fun. This is no longer, I'm trying to help you. This is like not going to work out well for you. Mm-hmm. That is, for me, the moment I experience the most dysregulation emotionally.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, especially in this kind of litigious place where people are writing down your every word and kind of looking for ways to get away sometimes with some behavior that they may not agree with is poor. And in fact, Ian is asking, and a few folks, 5 folks have said they would like to hear about this as well. He's interested in insights on handling the less tangible values or behaviors in performance issues, such as undermining teamwork. He says it's exemplified by the brilliant jerk, but comes in many forms. Like when you can't tie it directly to something that's, inside of that rubric, for example, right? That kind of underlying when you're undermining your teammates and you have somebody who there's a lot of folks maybe complaining about.
360 interviews. And then if you're not familiar, I think it's like Harvard Business School kind of thing where a coach or a manager goes and asks people who work with the subject, give me 2 or 3 things they could do more of that they do well that you want to encourage them to do, and then give me 2 or 3 things that they're struggling with. Mm-hmm. And then anonymizing that feedback. If someone is consistently undermining their coworkers, you're going to get some brutal quotes. Mm-hmm. Make sure you interview enough people that you can anonymize it and then give it to them. Yeah. Like, let them hear it. And if it's ugly enough, again, this has to change. Like this is not, ultimately, we're engaged in collaborative knowledge work. And back to the Google thing about psychological safety, if you have someone that is undermining the performance of their peers, they are breaking psychological safety. And if you go, I link it, Project Aristotle, there's an incredible Slashdot article about how if you take 4 random people and give them a time to task that can only be done as a collaboration, and you measure everything about them and ask what characteristic leads to success. Interestingly, the gender of the participants, up to and including all 4 are female, leads to success. And what Google did was decide not to become an all-female company, which that finding might have led to, and point out that psychological safety is the kind of, if you think of a Maslow's hierarchy of team success, without it, no matter how brilliant, smart, there's a great quote I heard at a Velocity conference years ago, I'd rather have a hole on my team than an asshole.
Yeah.
And I think that Project Aristotle research really supports, no matter how brilliant your asshole, you are less effective as a team and you're better off without them.
I love that. Great. So we have probably around 6 minutes-ish. You want to do a few more quick lightning round?
Sure.
All right. What support can you offer to a high performer in danger of burnout? I know you spoke a little bit about that you used to kind of micromanage folks and drive. And then at the end, they're like, oh. So what support can you offer to a high performer in danger of burnout?
Yeah. Well, one thing I write about in the blog is it can be easy as a manager to take your high performers a little bit for granted, because they're the ones who are crushing it. It's really worth spending the time to understand what their motivations are. Because often there's a tie-in between, like everything in life, your motivations have a plus side and a downside. And a lot of times when we're getting burnt out, we're driving ourselves too hard, and helping the person understand why they're driving themselves too hard can be a really great way to help them undo that. Because it's going to come down to something like, are they fear and anxiety based? Do they just need more reassurance? Are they so identified with the recognition that they're not giving themselves the time to take a break? Are they all about winning? I guess in that case, I would start with the motivation. Sorry, you said lightning round. I'll try to make my answer short.
No, not at all. And in fact, we have a few more, but they kind of touch on some things that we've already touched on. One thing that I love that you write about in the Medium post that we're sharing is the difference between healthy and unhealthy motivations and how to spot them. And I think that's something that we can, afterwards, folks can go ahead and read on to as well. Okay, this is an interesting one. A junior engineer may be hardworking, receptive to feedback, and dedicated to improving, but still needs a lot, uppercase, of support to complete their tasks. How do you handle a situation where this causes stress to other members of the team?
Yeah, I'll come back to, I eventually reached the conclusion that you take a mentor and you tell them for the next 4, 5, or even 6 weeks, their number one goal is getting that junior off to a great start. And that's more important than their work output. Right. And, that's again, one of those improving daily work more important. Another one of those trade-offs between getting some feature in a customer's hand this quarter and getting into next quarter with a higher performing team. Yeah, that would be my answer. Get that person going.
Yeah, I love that. This one's a good one for lightning round. What is the single most important trait you have seen in high performers?
Learning, constant learning.
Yeah, autodidacts, that's definitely.
Yeah, learning and teaching. I really think the old saw about those who can't teach is exactly opposite of true.
Yes.
It is harder to teach the thing than to do it.
Completely agree. Hence all the feedback you had about mentoring and having to go back and actually check your work and think about how can you really help someone in that 30-minute period effectively.
There's some really interesting psychological research that shows we actually learn best from someone who is at the next level of skill. And for those of us who've been doing this decades, the challenge then is to get yourself back into the mindset of that person's level and unpack. We're all, our brains are very efficient. We take things we've learned and we kind of modularize them and add interfaces and basically create classes and methods, and kind of forget about all the work we did to initially construct that class. And if you want to go teach somebody, you've got to figure out where they're at and then figure out what that next level is. There's a great quote from another First Round article that I love that says, true feedback is an inquiry. And I think this is one of the ways it's true. If you don't first ask where the person is at, your coaching will kind of miss their level.
Yeah, totally. This is one that I have personally understood and experienced. Oh my goodness, it disappeared. Okay. And experienced. And I think there's a few of us that have, and I would love for you to give some advice for folks who are new to management and how to help this situation. But how do you manage high performers, or I would say, or even outspoken, who know how important they are, but they steamroll everyone else with their opinions? Not an easy lightning round, but I think it's something that a lot of us have experienced in our careers.
Maybe we finish with that.
Yeah, let's finish with that.
I think the kind of mental flip they need to make is that at some level of their career, being the best is what gets them promoted. Mm-hmm. But then, again, software development is the ultimate expression of collaborative knowledge work. It really is true. If someone can go off and by themselves get it all done, that is always better. Like, collaboration slows you down. But we all work as teams. And so the mental model they've got to flip from is, I'm no longer going to really reward you for your personal success. In fact, we even talk about this when we have promotion discussions. At a certain level, if all of the rationale for promoting somebody is the things they did, that no longer works. It needs to be, how did they help the team succeed?
Yeah.
And that's on you as a manager to communicate. And if you communicate that if successfully, they should flip from the behavior that you described.
I love that. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for asking all your questions. Mustafa, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, I guess in the minute that we have, I just want to say some quick closing remarks. Actually, one quick thing I saw in the chat box, one of our attendees, Kate, was asking about the source for the Project Aristotle kind of study. I think if you Google...
It's in the links.
It's in the link, yeah.
There's a Google link.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess for everyone, we'll be sending out a recap email, and some of the links we'll be sending out will be blog posts that Chris has written. So one of them is on managing high performers. One of them is a blog post on managing low performers, and then there is a kind of article or post on interesting links. So one of those touches on the study that Chris had mentioned. So that's going to be a really great post, which is all sorts of other kind of resources and other reading material for you to check out. So with all of that, I just want to say thank you once again to Chris. Thank you so much for all those kind of golden nuggets of wisdom. Thanks to Shannon from Karat for being a really great moderator, being a really great host. And thank you all. So yeah, hope you'll enjoy the last hour. And then, yeah, we'll see you next time. We'll be sending out some more details later this week on the next AMA. So take care, everyone. Stay safe, wash your hands, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for putting up with me.
Take care. Thanks for listening. Take care.